Investigating the president. The public hearings in the impeachment inquiry into President Donald Trump are over for now. We look back at the testimony and a look ahead to what comes next. A call to joy. We're on the ground in Thailand as Pope Francis delivers a message to Catholics in the majority Buddhist country. Election preview. Amid months of anti-government protests, citizens in Hong Kong are headed to the polls this weekend. And the beauty of faith. On the feast of Saint Cecilia, we examine a painting dedicated to the patron saint of musicians. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, November 22nd, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. President Donald Trump keeps up his attack on the impeachment inquiry. Today, he called it a hoax started by a fake whistleblower, and he's not backing down from allegations Ukraine interfered in the 2016 election. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. The president sounded off twice today, first this morning on Fox News, and again at an event with college athletes here at the White House. The public impeachment hearings are over, but the president's frustration continues.
I think we had a tremendous week with the hoax, the great hoax. They call it the impeachment hoax.
As he disparages the ongoing impeachment investigation, today President Trump promoted a conspiracy theory that Ukraine interfered in the 2016 election. Impeachment witness Fiona Hill says the claim has been discredited by intelligence agencies and the president's own advisors.
This is a fictional narrative that has been perpetrated and propagated by the Russian security services themselves. The unfortunate truth is that Russia was the foreign power that systematically attacked our democratic institutions in 2016.
In an interview today with Fox and Friends, the president also said he knows the identity of the anonymous whistleblower who filed the complaint that started the impeachment inquiry.
I consider it to be a fake whistleblower because what he wrote didn't correspond to what I said in any way, shape, or form.
Still, President Trump believes the impeachment probe has rallied his supporters in Congress.
I don't think I've ever seen support in the Republican Party like we do right now. We've never had this kind of support.
The president says if House Democrats vote to impeach him, he would welcome a trial in the Senate. The Republican majority there would be able to share its side of the story and come to the president's defense.
The president was also asked about his running mate in 2020 today. Rumors have been circulating that former United Nations Ambassador Nikki Haley would replace Mike Pence on the ticket, but the president put those rumors to rest today, saying Pence is his pick 100%. Wyatt?
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. Congressional Democrats could vote to impeach the president before the end of the year. The public hearings are wrapped for now, and lawmakers will head home for Thanksgiving. But that doesn't mean the investigation takes a break. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi explains. Jason?
Wyatt, congressional staffers need to put together the evidence from these hearings, and then the Intelligence Committee will hand off their report to the House Judiciary Committee. They're the ones that have to decide whether to write articles of impeachment. But there's still a big outstanding question if they should wait for more witnesses, including White House Chief of Staff, acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, but he's not responding. So if they want, this could lead to delays and a long legal fight.
Good morning. Good morning.
The Speaker of the House refuses to offer an impeachment timetable.
Can you clarify what you mean about the timing and...
No, I can't because there's no time. I don't know anything.
Democrats are fighting in court to hear from extra witnesses. However, that's not stopping their party from moving quickly.
We cannot be at the mercy of the courts. The courts are very important in all of this. Those cases will continue. But I have never said we cannot proceed without the courts because that's a technique on the part of the administration. Just keep ratcheting up to a higher court.
Democrats say the hearings already revealed what's needed for their investigation.
The evidence is clear that the president has used his office for his own personal gain, and in doing so undermined the national security of the United States by withholding military assistance to the Ukraine.
Republicans are standing by the president and point to one hole in the testimony. No one could personally say if the president directly linked withholding aid to Ukraine with his request for that country to investigate his political rivals.
Well, I think if you look at Sondland and the the length of the interview, I would sum it up with one individual asking him questions, Congressman Mike Turner. He asked him, "Is anybody on the planet tell you in the process there had to be a quid pro quo or anything with holding up the aid?" He said no.
And moderate Republican Will Hurd says the president's actions were inappropriate but not impeachable. And this division between Republicans and Democrats we're seeing on the national level. A recent Emerson College poll found 45% of the country does not support impeaching the president. 43% does. Wyatt?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvey reporting. Thanks, Jason. Joining me now from Capitol Hill is Representative Chris Smith, Republican from New Jersey and senior member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman, welcome back to the program. We've had 5 days of public testimony from about a dozen witnesses. What do you think about the testimony you've been hearing?
Well, I've been profoundly unimpressed by the testimony. Matter of fact, you know, I've been in Congress for 39 years, and I have to tell you, the bureaucrats don't run our foreign policy. The president and the Congress runs our foreign policy in that order. We provide the resources, but the day-to-day direction comes from the President of the United States. And if they disagree with a policy, that's fine. That has happened from day one of this republic. But it's very disturbing to think that people substitute their view for the president's and then make it into something that they even approached saying it's impeachable. I saw nothing that would suggest that high crimes and misdemeanors have been committed. And I think that's, you know, the bar is very high for impeachment because it's the undoing of an election by the people of the United States. You know, our votes do count. And when you vote for somebody, Republican or Democrat or anything else, any other party, you should not have that undone by a process. Disagree with the president all you want. That's the beauty of America. Some people even hate the president, and that's unfortunate. But that's not an impeachable offense.
We appreciate your thoughts on the impeachment inquiry. Turning now to another important topic, the ongoing violence in Hong Kong. You've advocated for human rights there for some time. This week, Congress passed 2 bills aimed at supporting the people of Hong Kong. They now go to the White House for President Trump's signature. What message do you hope this legislation sends?
Well, you know, I first introduced the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act in 2014, and it was blocked by a lot of the so-called experts, the Sino experts, both at the State Department and in Congress. And I believe that if we had a clear message to Beijing, especially, and Xi Jinping, the dictator there, that the special status of Hong Kong is put at risk, the ability to evade customs and a lot of other things, tariffs, they get a very special treatment for products that transship through there as well as those that are produced in and around there, that would be a goner. And if we had said that earlier, I think Beijing would have known that there was a consequence and a penalty for their gross violations of human rights against the demonstrators, the torture that we now are hearing more and more about, as well as the beatings that these great democracy activists are under, having put upon them by the police, the Hong Kong police and others. This is a very volatile situation. We stand in solidarity with the democracy activists. 30 years ago, as Tiananmen Square was unfolding, the United States of America, and this continued right through the Clinton administration, did nothing to except verbally, to show that there was a penalty for the Tiananmen Square massacre. And that, in my humble opinion, enabled the communists in Beijing to expand their abuse of human rights, which they've done. The president will sign this bill, and I think we will see a serious change. We got to stand in solidarity with the democracy activists.
To follow up with you about Beijing's government, China has threatened to take, quote, strong countermeasures if the bills are signed into law. What's your response to China? Well,
that's what they have gotten away with ever since Tiananmen Square and before. They threaten, and sometimes they carry out their threats. But, man, we're talking about a Xi Jinping, the dictator, who now is kind of like dictator for life. This man is on a tear in the wrong direction, moving very aggressively, even against religion. I wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post last December 27th and talked about how the world leaders need to speak out for what Xi Jinping is doing to all religions. I think we have to be so firm and strong first and foremost for the people of Hong Kong and all of China, and then for the region and the world. You know, the hegemony that they have been practicing in that region is very real. They're all over Africa, they're all over in Latin America, in Central and South America, passing on their bad governance model, which they want the world to accept and to embrace. They are in the process of destroying faith, if they can do it, and we've got to speak up. So every human rights abuse, name it, Xi Jinping is crushing the people who want to exercise their fundamental human rights.
So many important issues that we're continuing to cover in China, and again, continuing to highlight the plight of the religious and ethnic minorities there. Congressman Chris Smith, Republican from New Jersey, thanks so much for your take.
Thank you, White. Thank you very much.
Hong Kong is preparing for elections this weekend. Experts believe the vote is a referendum on the anti-government protests. The vote involves more than 450 seats in the city council. It is shaping up to be a pivotal battleground for demonstrators anxious to use the vote as a way to legitimize their case. Police in the former British territory say they will be out in force at polling stations. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vows to fight what he calls an attempted coup. Netanyahu is facing calls to resign after he was indicted on corruption charges. The country is bracing for a bitter fight. The indictments are likely to end any chance of forming a unity government following deadlocked September elections. Another round of voting is expected in March. Iran's judiciary chief says there will be, quote, a harsh punishment for protesters who continue to demonstrate against a rise in gasoline prices. State television showed the official speaking at a rally in Tehran. The report says at least 106 people have been killed in the unrest. The rise in gas prices is in part because of U.S. sanctions that have crippled Iran's economy. Thousands of people took to the streets to protest their government in Lebanon. Drone footage shows the rally in an area occupied by demonstrators since last month. The protests are against the country's political elite who have run the country since 1990. Demonstrators are calling for a new government and elections. Reports say a Catholic Monsignor in China is being pressured to join the state church run by the Communist Party. He has been demoted from bishop as part of the Vatican's effort at reconciliation with Beijing. There are 12 million Catholics in China. They're divided between those worshiping in state-sanctioned churches and those who follow the underground church. Pope Francis urges Thailand's residents, young and old, to practice faith with joy. He delivered the message during his visit today to St. Peter's Parish, a Catholic community outside Bangkok. The Holy Father told a few hundred priests and nuns that he read with some pain that for many Thais, Christianity is a religion for foreigners. He told the faithful to find ways to talk about faith like, quote, a mother who sings lullabies to her child. Catholic news agency's Hannah Brockhouse has more from Thailand.
Wyatt, I'm right now outside the Cathedral of the Assumption in Bangkok, Thailand, where Pope Francis will shortly celebrate Mass with young people. You can see them behind me. And earlier this morning, he met with religious, priests, seminarians, and catechists of Thailand, where he spoke about the need to have a Catholic faith with a Thai face, that it shouldn't be just a religion for foreigners in Thailand. And after that meeting, he met with bishops of Thailand and of Greater Asia. He asked them to stand with and intercede for the people of their churches who are often downtrodden and persecuted. Pope Francis afterward met with 18 different religious leaders of various world religions, including Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, Muslim. Now he has just arrived at the cathedral a few minutes ago. This is the last appointment of his in Thailand. Tomorrow morning he will celebrate Mass privately before leaving for Japan, the second half of his trip in Asia. In Bangkok, Hannah Brockhouse, EWTN News Nightly.
Coming up, analysis of Chick-fil-A's decision to halt donations to 3 companies who oppose same-sex marriage. Former Penn State assistant football coach Jerry Sandusky is set to be re-sentenced. He was convicted of nearly 50 counts of child sexual abuse and was sentenced to several decades in prison. The 75-year-old arrived at Center County Court in Pennsylvania today. Sandusky maintains his innocence. Earlier this week, fast food chain ChickfilA announced it will no longer donate to 3 groups who oppose same-sex marriage. The organizations include the Salvation Army and the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. The Atlanta-based company says it made the move to stop protests and broaden its consumer base. Starting next year, its donations will focus on 3 areas: hunger, homelessness, and education. The restaurant says it may still donate to faith-based groups. Chick-fil-A is closed on Sundays in part so its employees can attend church. Joining me now is David Namo, Executive Director and CEO of the Christian Legal Society. David, welcome into the show.
Great to be here, Wyatt.
Chick-fil-A says, as I mentioned, made the decision to stop protests and increase its consumer base. Do you believe them, or do you think there's other factors at play here?
I think Chick-fil-A has an opportunity to do the right thing. So there's been a lot of response to them saying we're not going to give money to the Salvation Army or Fellowship of Christian Athletes because of protests, but then nothing else after that. So when we look at the groups that they decided to give to, like Covenant House, which does homeless stuff, that is very pro-LGBT, and stop giving to groups that hold a traditional view of marriage as being between one man and one woman, then we have to say what's going on here, right? And who are the protests? The only protests that we know are from the LGBT community that's upset with some of the stances of Chick-fil-A and its founder, Truett Cathy.
And certainly none of that is necessarily new. So what has the reaction been so far from these announcements?
The reaction is really disappointment. People are disappointed. And, you know, from the head of Focus on the Family to the Baptist group and people are disappointed. They say the same thing. Don't give in to the censorship mob. Don't give in to pressure. The reason you become the 3rd largest fast food chain in the country is because the people like us that support you, that understand your Christian values, and you're going to give in to a mob that isn't buying your product now anyway. So it's confusing.
So what do you think this means for the Salvation Army and the Fellowship of Christian Athletes who won't be receiving the same donations now year after year?
I think the most dangerous part of this, and that's why I think Chick-fil-A has an opportunity to come out and do the right thing. They have not issued a public statement since that first public statement. Other people have issued statements like Franklin Graham saying this isn't the case, but the company itself hasn't said anything. And if they decide to do this, then it sets a terrible precedence, right? So Salvation Army could lose a ton of donations, right? Corporations are being pressured to not give to groups that do wonderful work. How can you defend not giving money to Salvation Army when you say your priority is homelessness and hunger? So I think it sets a bad precedence.
For many Catholics, they're a little bit concerned about donating to the Salvation Army because there are differences, right? Salvation Army is primarily a Protestant group, for example. Catholics have a little bit different take on the allowance of abortions. Catholics obviously are against abortion at all stages. How do you reconcile those two when Catholics might be a little bit hesitant when it comes to the Salvation Army?
Well, as far as the Salvation Army, I can't speak to how Catholics should feel about the Salvation Army. But when anybody thinks about homelessness and hunger, what do you think of first? The Salvation Army. And you hear the bells on the corners at Christmas. I've already seen some this year. My bigger fear, and this is what Catholics should think about, is if they're going to start defunding people or groups because of their sincerely held Christian and religious beliefs, that's a bad precedent. And so we've seen Catholic adoption agencies, right? Mm-hmm. And Catholic foster agencies and Catholic hospitals face the same kind of wrath because somebody didn't like what they believed. So it's a bad precedent, and you should never give in to the mob because they're never satisfied.
It is very concerning, especially for so many organizations that support traditional marriage. David Namo, Executive Director and CEO of the Christian Legal Society, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Wyatt.
Up next, a look at a painting dedicated to the life of Saint Cecilia on this, her feast day. Today marks the feast day of Saint Cecilia, patron saint of musicians and poets. Joining me now is Jim Sullivan, author of The Beauty of Faith. She's going to tell us about a painting at the National Gallery of Art that ties into today's celebration. Jim, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Wyatt.
Tell us first a little bit about Saint Cecilia. What do we know about her?
You know, we know that in the first 4 to 5 centuries of the Church's life, there were waves of persecution and countless Christian martyrs. These were men and women who willingly accepted death for their faith in Jesus Christ. The word martyr itself means witness. And what's interesting is that many of the early Christian martyrs were young people. These were youth in the prime of their life who were not afraid to give their lives for their faith in Jesus. Saint Cecilia was one of these young Christian martyrs. She's the patroness of musicians, and she was revered from very early on because she witnessed to her faith as a young Roman youth.
She's an incredible example. Let's take a look at this painting from the National Gallery of Art. What do we see here?
So we see the young Cecilia playing the organ, but this is her artistic attribute, and in front of her stands an angel who holds up a sheet of music, and Cecilia is playing the music, obviously, that the angel is showing her. Notice that both figures are bathed in this warm golden light, giving them kind of a heavenly, ethereal quality. And you can almost hear the beautiful sacred music that Cecilia is playing in front of the angel. We don't know much about the historical details of her life, but what we do know is that Cecilia was a young Roman woman who was Christian by birth, and she, at her wedding to a pagan Roman nobleman, she was said to have sung hymns to God in her heart. And so later on, her husband, Valerian, and his brother would convert to Christianity and be martyred, along with Cecilia, who was killed by the sword.
It's an incredible story. What do you think it is that we can learn from St. Cecilia and her example that we can apply to our lives in this day and age?
You know, few of us will be called to the martyrdom of St. Cecilia or even the martyrdom of countless Christian martyrs who even today are being persecuted to the point of death for their faith. But by baptism, we are all called to witness to Christ by the example of our lives as well as our words and our actions. I think St. Cecilia shows us that our Christian witness should allow us to sing the hymns of God, of praise to God, and that as we sing not only with our lips, but with our lives as well, the witness of our lives.
She's such an appropriate saint, especially here in America, that we're celebrating this because we have Thanksgiving right around the corner. So she's a great example. Jim Sullivan, author of The Beauty of Faith, thanks so much for talking with us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Finally tonight, Pope Francis leaves Thailand tomorrow for Japan. It also marks the end of his impromptu family reunion with his second cousin. Sister Anna Rosa Savori is not only related to the Holy Father, she has served as his translator in Thailand. The two have been inseparable during the visit, sharing several jokes and laughs. Sister Anna Rosa's father and the Pope's mother were first cousins. Some Vatican experts say the positive interaction between the Holy Father and his cousin is a sign the Pope is serious when he says he wants an increased role for women in the Church. And of course, it's always nice to just see a family reunion, including with the Pope. And that concludes our newscast for tonight. We thank you for watching. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back on Monday with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.